INCREDULOUS, Chapter 2. Flirting with Disaster. The girl was brought in and asked to lay down on a stretcher. The heavy leather harnesses were placed over her body and the straps secured. Her body was then covered with a blanket. The girl's father positioned himself among the three soldiers who would be doubling as assistants. Joshua entered the room fidgeting with something under his cassock. Father Artemis entered last and alone. Turning to address the small group, Father Artemis announced, "Listen carefully. Do whatever is commanded of you by the Archbishop or myself. If addressed by the demon, do not converse with it. Joshua, I have more than enough assistance. I think it would be best if you prayed at the foot of the stretcher during the entire exorcism. You might want to kneel on a cushion, son. I have a feeling it's going to be a long night." Artemis repeated his commands in Spanish to the assistants. Without another word, Joshua grabbed a cushion from a bench near the altar and took his position. He activated one of the recording devices on the floor and another that hung around his neck. In a loud voice, Joshua summoned up the events of the previous month. He then gave the date and time, followed by the girl's name, age, and condition, adding that her parents had given permission for the rite of exorcism to be performed. Cardinal Bishop Pablo de la Torre had given permission for Padre Artemis Murphy to begin the formal ritus exorcandi obsesso ad demonio. Joshua named all the accompanying priests, the girl's father, Sergeant Martinez, adding that 4 soldiers stood guard outside the church. "You forgot to mention we are being pummeled by hurricane winds and each of us is soaking wet," added Archbishop Felipe. Ignoring the archbishop, Joshua opened the Roman Pontifical, or Book of Exorcism. Beginning with the 54th Psalm, he recited in a low voice, "Deus in nome tuo salvam me fac, et in virtute tu judica me, deus ex ante oratium." On the pew next to Joshua was a crucifix, a plastic bottle filled with holy water, a small handbell, and the relic belonging to the saint, in case Father Artemis had need of them. In addition to the psalm, other prescribed prayers were the litanies of saints, the Patre Noster, or Lord's Prayer, the Ave Maria, Hail Mary. Artemis preferred that Joshua recite the prayers in Latin. That seemed to be more effective. In addition to these duties, Joshua would normally be required to make certain that special candles remained lit and that cruets of water and wine remained full. For tonight, though, Padre Ricardo would be in charge of those duties. Artemis began reciting the opening salutation in a commanding and authoritative voice. Normally he would have recited the Ritus Exorcandi, the Roman ritual of Christian exorcism. The ritual is spoken in Latin and translates into something like, "I cast thee out, thou unclean spirit, along with the least encroachment of the wicked enemy and every phantom and diabolical legion. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, depart and vanish from this child of God." Except that in this case, the exorcist was under strict instructions not to expel this particular demon. Artemis called upon the demon to make itself known, as it was rare to find only one demon involved. Artemis wanted to ascertain the names and the natures of any other that might be involved. He demanded that they speak out and identify themselves. Yesenia became maniacal, but the thick leather straps managed to keep her restrained. Artemis continued the ritual, demanding to know why the demon was here. Yesenia responded with a screaming tantrum. Her face began to distort. Loud thumps and scratching noises seemed to emanate from within the walls. Joshua noticed his breath becoming visible as the temperature in the old church dropped drastically. His words became strained. He felt weighed down by a suffocating pressure. The possessed girl became physically immovable, anchored to the ground by possessed gravity, the opposite of levitation, where a possessed person rises off the ground. The demon spoke, confirming its identity. Its breath reeked of an acrid yet distinctive stench that quickly filled the room. The disgusting odor made it difficult for the priest to breathe, and many in the room covered their mouths and noses. Had this been a normal exorcism, the exorcist would have demanded to know when the demon would depart. This departure would usually be accompanied by the demon proclaiming Jesus Christ as Lord, sometimes uttering the words in Latin, Christus Domini, at which point the exorcism would be over. Archbishop Felipe Espindola approached Yesenia. You are familiar with the parish church at Rennes-le-Château in France. He pronounced the French name flawlessly, then added, You should be. There is a statue dedicated to you near its entrance. Didn't this hypocrite just finish telling me not to ask questions about that chapel? Thought Joshua. As he continued reciting aloud, Joshua wondered if the archbishop would ask why Abbe Sarnier placed the bizarre inscription "Terrible is est" over the porch lintel. The Latin literal translation is "terrible is this place," but the actual meaning was more along the lines of "this place is awesome." As a priest, Joshua was fascinated with the bizarre inconsistencies of the plaques depicting the Stations of the Cross at Rennes-le-Château. The plaques were positioned in reversed order. One displayed a child swathed in Scottish plaid. Another showed Pontius Pilate wearing a veil over his face. But the most intriguing mystery of all involved the statues that stood behind the altar. The ornate statues of Saint Joseph and Mother Mary were each depicted holding a Christ child, what some might term identical twins. These are the questions to which we seek answers, continued the Archbishop. My first question deals with the riddle hidden within the code parchment. Shepherdess, no temptation. That Poussin Teniers holds the key. Peace 681 by the cross. And this horse of God I complete. This demon guardian at midday blue apples. The phrase I'm most interested in is blue apples at midday. We have reason to believe that phrase is somehow associated with the statue dedicated to you. You speak of a message deciphered by the night's tour, responded Asmodeus in a deep voice, hissing. A logic puzzle, which has only one solution, as does the coded message. Now we're getting somewhere, added the Archbishop. You seek to understand the code, said Asmodeus, but fail to understand the men who created it, the knights of the temple. I have no interest in medieval heretics, interrupted the Archbishop. All that is required of you is the meaning of blue apples at noon. Do you understand? Understand? Oh, I understand, responded Asmodeus. Your focus is on the blue apples and their connection to the Anunnaki stargates. If I were you, I would be more concerned with the two painters so prominently mentioned within the code itself. Suddenly, the box positioned next to the stretcher was thrust across the room. It smashed against the wall with a thunderous crash. This was followed by a long, low, mournful wail in the distance. "Un lobo!" exclaimed the soldier. Whatever made that howl was much larger than a wolf, thought Joshua. The silence was broken by the yelp of a small dog, then many larger dogs barking like hounds on the hunt. The sound of their baying made it obvious that they were headed for the old church. Asmodeus's deep guttural laughter slowly transformed into the melodious glee of a beautiful enchantress. The laughter ceased abruptly as she locked eyes with the archbishop. "Now I'll ask you a question. Think carefully, for it pertains to you, priest. What is the meaning of blue balls at midnight?" Trying to contain his laughter, Joshua looked up, locking eyes with the gorgeous creature secured in the restraints. His sinuous black hair had turned coppery red. Her sapphire blue eyes were set against an unnatural bronze complexion. He gaped in awe at her intoxicating beauty. Artemis nudged Joshua's shoulder, bringing him back to reality. Sheepishly he glanced down at the book in his hands. The dreadful wailing of the hounds in the distance sounded much closer now. Joshua had heard these hellhounds before. In fact, he had once seen the dreadful creature that initiated that canine chorus when he was only 4 years old. His imagination began to run wild as he struggled to find the place where he'd left off. His inventive mind easily tracked the large pack as they hurried up the winding mountain roads toward the village. Outraged and oblivious to the approaching danger, the archbishop continued barking out his demands. Ignoring his inquiries, the demon continued asking questions. "What is the horse of God, and why are there two astride it?" Sergeant Martinez, a short, portly individual who had begun to tire of guarding the door, asked the doctor, "This thing, it is a demonio, eh?" But before the doctor could respond, Martinez screamed, "Ay, Dios mío!" Clutching for a sidearm, he gazed at the ceiling above. "My God, was that a lechuza?" asked Dr. Lazo. Still kneeling at the front of the stretcher, Joshua heard something large land on the roof. As it tried furiously to tear its way into the old church from above, Joshua felt the presence of something that did not want him to be there. Then the stretcher began to bounce on the pews. "It had to be one," explained Sergeant Martinez in a heavy Spanish accent. "They used to fly over my grandmother's house when I was a little boy. My grandfather would shoot them with bullets he had prepared by scratching a crucifix on them. Otherwise, the bullets would not go off," he explained. "You heard a lechuza just now?" asked Joshua, knowing he shouldn't have asked. "Yes. There was a horribly loud whistle, almost a shriek, and then a loud thump, followed by the sound of scratching on the roof," said Dr. Lazo. "You did not hear it?" asked Padre Ricardo. "No, I heard it land and start clawing at the roof." "Was it really that loud?" asked Joshua. "What are you talking about? My entire body shook." "You didn't hear that damn thing?" asked Dr. Lazo. "You might want to start scratching crosses on some of your bullets, Sergeant," suggested Padre Ricardo. "Si, yes, that's a good idea," agreed Martinez. Padre Ricardo instructed Martinez to scratch one cross on the firing cap and another cross on each side of it. Joshua's knees began to throb. The rain and wind and thunder outside intensified, making it difficult to hear what was being said inside the old church. Joshua suspected that the recording would be inaudible. He decided to stop praying and began repeating the demands of the archbishop and the demon's responses into the recorder suspended around his neck. Joshua was startled by a bright red flash that lit up the interior of the small church. He had always been able to see these intense bursts of energy. They came as a result of someone being frightened or startled. He doubted the other priests would understand his ability to see auras, and so had always kept these insights to himself. Sergeant Martinez jumped at the sound of machine gun fire erupting outside, dropping the handful of bullets into which he'd begun scratching crosses. Martinez turned in terror, looking wide-eyed in the direction of the double doors. A strong gust of wind had blown them open. Rain poured in, as a long, mournful howl reverberated off the walls of the interior. Joshua felt his lungs resonate as the hair on the back of his neck prickled up. He sprang to his knees, but his legs were slow to respond, having knelt for so long. The hounds drew closer as he rushed for the door. Shit, he thought, as his pre-combat jitters kicked in, and his stomach began to wrench with gut-twisting fear. Probably why exorcist fast, he thought. Don't look, just don't look, he told himself. Sergeant Martinez hurried to barricade the doors as he called for his men out over the sound of the wind and automatic weapons fire to get inside the old church. But the sergeant's commands were interrupted by the horrible cries of his soldiers. "I have heard that howling before," shouted Padre Ricardo as he assisted in slamming the doors shut. Joshua barricaded the doors by fitting a large timber into the iron brackets securing the main entrance. Mercifully, they'd managed to stop the infernal beast. All other doors had been locked before the exorcism began. "Twice I have heard these dogs. It is said that death comes to claim you if you hear these dogs 3 times," shouted Padre Ricardo over the baying of the hellhounds. "Death stalks us all this night, Padre," said Artemis, arriving at the doors to see if he could be of assistance. "It is just a little closer today than usual." Luckily, this old church was built more like a fortress than a temple of worship, thought Joshua. He tugged at the heavy, solid oak crossbeam wedged into its iron supports and felt the frantic scratching of heavy paws on the hard wood. It had never occurred to Joshua that he might have to lock the doors to keep something from getting in. A hysterical archbishop screamed instructions that were already known to everyone. "What happened to the men outside?" asked the doctor. "Hellhounds," answered Joshua, backing away from the doors. To his horror, he saw Dr. Lazo reach for the heavy oak crossbeam as if to lift it. The sensation of frantic scratching and clawing from the other side of the doors seemed to startle the doctor, and he drew back in horror. "What is scratching at the doors? And why is everyone yelling?" he asked in an almost inaudible voice. "The howling and barking from the hellhounds is so loud I can barely hear you, Doc," explained Joshua. "He doesn't hear them, Joshua," deduced Artemis. "But then, neither do I. What are they doing now?" The remainder of the pack was running circles around the old structure, baying and wailing in an almost unnatural manner. "They are circling the church," answered Padre Ricardo. Satisfied that the doors would hold, Joshua turned to assist with Yesenia. 2 soldiers were holding down the stretcher. The girl's father appeared terrified, but remained near his daughter. Time seemed to stand still. Joshua stared in disbelief as the ceiling slowly rose and was torn from the structure. The voices of the other priests became inaudible. His mind, frozen in fear, was useless. Intuitively, he knew what he had to do. Looking up, he saw raindrops as they hovered, suspended in the air. Brilliant flashes of lightning illuminated the funnel cloud of a tornado. Joshua could hear the muted thumping of his heart in the silence that followed. Running instinctively toward Yesenia, who was still strapped to the stretcher in the form of an enchantress, he pulled the blanket over himself and covered the girl's upper body, shielding her face. The pews rose off the ground and bounced violently, smashing into one another. Soon after that, the area inside the small building was filled with foliage, mud, and debris swirling in the confined space. Joshua struggled with the blanket, trying to keep their faces covered in order to prevent inhaling the suffocating sludge that was swirling within the enclosure. As the deafening sound of the tornado began to subside, the young priest looked about in the darkness and turned on a small, powerful LED flashlight. Joshua gazed forlornly at the devastation, hoping to see something recognizable in the wreckage. Grimacing at the filthy scene, he could not make out any of the priests or assistants among the mud-splattered pile of pews that littered the tiny space. He could still hear the hounds running around the church and decided to turn off the flashlight. His mind flashed back to his days of pilot training. "What should we do if a carburetor ices up?" a curious student had asked. "If you're flying at night, I suggest you turn off the headlights," the instructor had advised. "Why? So we'll have enough juice to try and restart the engine?" another student had asked. "And no, it's so that you don't have to see the Earth coming at you just before you die," the old pilot had explained. The skies began to clear, and the wind subsided. "We must be entering the eye of the hurricane," thought Joshua, gazing up at the cliff-like formations of clouds that seemed to reach to the stars. He could make out three large silhouettes descending against the backdrop of stars. Lechuzas, he thought. The three large figures began attacking something on the floor. Against his better judgment, Joshua shone the flashlight at them. He saw three white, bird-like creatures with long white hair, ripping a thick Bible to shreds. The light startled the creatures. All three stood motionless, staring directly at him. In appearance, each was somewhere between a harpy and an owl, with a slender, goose-like neck and a head the size of a large lemon. Beady black eyes squinted in the bright light. These things had the face of an old woman, not of birds. Joshua tried to stand, but an intense pain shot through his right side of his rib cage, preventing him from doing so.